what I began to see was I was almost performing for Sunday, get up, find an outfit to wear, make sure you didn't wear it in the last couple weeks, you know what I'm saying? Make sure you look the part, do all the things you got to do, and come home and crash.
Welcome. You're listening to The Glass House, hosted by Lifeway. We're Ben and Lindley Mandrell, and we have conversations with leaders who have experienced the stress of ministry and have sensed a spotlight on their personal lives. We want to encourage ministry families and provide a glimpse inside their glass house. And before we start this episode, I want to invite you to participate in the conversation. If you have feedback to offer, a general question for Lindley or me, or if there's a topic you'd like for us to tackle in the future, email us at president@lifeway.com. We read every one of those emails. Welcome to the Glass House. Today on the show, we have Duce and Missie Branch. Duce is an assistant professor of preaching and Bible at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, and he's also a rapper, which I've done a lot of in my life. Missie is on the team at Southeastern as well as the assistant dean of students and women and the director of graduate life. But for the purpose of this show, we want you to know that they were church planters and they went through a lot. And today's show is about the emotional toll that church planting takes on a couple.
Duce and Missie, thanks so much for coming on the podcast with us. We think people need to hear your story. Pastors and pastors' wives live in this glass house, and the pains and struggles are real. And it's kind of like we've talked about in marriage, when people say for better, for worse, they normally mean for better. They don't realize it could mean for worse.
Yes.
And sometimes in ministry, there's hard things you got to go through, and you wonder, why did God allow this? How am I going to get through this? And so Lindley and I wanted, we're church planters at heart too. You have a church planting story and some pain involved in that. So tell us a little bit about your church planting story.
It's interesting. There's a guy by the name of Gary Frost. The Southern Baptist world should know Gary Frost, African-American pastor, that used to bring my rap group out to do ministry at his church in Youngstown, Ohio. Many years later, he was with NAM, and he called me and he said, "Hey, are you interested in planting a hip-hop church?" At the time, I said, well, I'm not for the hip-hop church. I'm for a church where hip-hop would not only be permitted, but actually would be encouraged and nurtured. He said, I like it even better. And so really the church plant started with someone recognizing that what I've seen in you for many years leads me to entrust you with this new responsibility. So I said no at first, but then I was looking at the climate, just my world, the context I was in, and I said, you know what? We're doing great at evangelism, but we're not creating a space where people can be nurtured from infancy to maturity, from conversion on to discipleship. So that's what made us originally say yes. At the time, I was also intrigued by the plurality model, because growing up in my context, I was only used to the senior pastor model, just one expert and everyone else is sort of way down behind, and to each his own. But I started looking at a plurality model, and I said, man, with some guys, I said, man, we should let's come together.
Let's get a team.
Let's get a team, and let's really show them a husky force of godly men leading and steering, and so it ended up getting whittled down to me and another guy. But the Lord blessed the way we went into Philadelphia and took advantage of years of pre-labor. Sometimes people just go to a place because it fits the demographic. They've done the studies. We not only saw that it fit the demographic and had done the studies, but we had labored as just evangelists and champions of urbanism submitted to Christocentrism. We had done that for so many years that when we went to plant, it seemed like it was already pregnant, and God honored it and did a lot of things we didn't expect. But that's how it all got started. And when I look back, I say the Lord truly did something amazing.
That's awesome. Missie, talk a little bit about some of the challenges associated with planting a church.
When Duce and I got married, I already knew he was an evangelist. He couldn't keep any job because he was giving the gospel. Yes. And so I already knew that's what we were going to do, but he had told me I'm not called to be a pastor. And so I sort of enjoyed the kind of silent background hidden wife life. We had a bunch of kids. They came like quick. So he would travel and I would have the opportunity to just be anonymous. And so when he told me he wanted to plant a church, it made sense. But I was kind of reticent. So he really had to go kind of with me kicking and screaming if I was to be transparent. Of course, I wasn't going to leave my husband. And I know if God called him, then I only want to be where God says go. But I wasn't excited about it.
And you didn't feel equipped for it. You didn't feel like you were ready to be in the spotlight.
Oh, no. Because we had lived his private world, his public world, and then his private world. That's what we had lived. But the place we were going back to, Philadelphia, is where I'm from. So I did have that comfort in knowing I'm going back. My mom will be there. My sisters will be there. So there was that. But yeah, he kind of had to drag me kicking and screaming because I was like, I don't want to go back. I don't want to do this.
Now, can I say that to me seems like an exaggeration because it's funny. The kicking and screaming is what we realized, at least I would say, looking backwards.
Right.
Because my wife, she goes along with it. She can go along with something but cloak what she's feeling. So she's the type. She's agreeable. She's the person that sort of allows people to do. There's very little no in her, and I'm sure she's going to talk about that. There's very little no in her. At least at that time, there was very little no in her. So you think it's yes, and so the kicking and screaming is actually figurative because there was some expressions of. But it wasn't a kicking and screaming. So, when you're like me, you're like, well, we all got to get over the jitters. Let's go. So it didn't feel like kicking and screaming. I don't want people to think I just railroaded her, knowing and seeing visible signs of it. But when we look back, it was like, oh, you were trying to say pump the brakes. You did say pump the brakes. I did not pump the brakes. Therefore, the wheels fell off.
I do think that there's a valuable lesson in that, too, just really taking the time to evaluate exactly where you actually are before you walk into something as big as that. Because our first several years of marriage were a whirlwind. His music career just took off in a way that he hadn't even anticipated. It was unbelievable. But so that meant a lot of travel, and we were trying to wait 2 years to have kids, and we had 2 kids in 2 years. And so there
goes your plan.
Right. Yes. Right. And so we moved for him. We were living in Philadelphia. We moved to one city for him to finish his Bible degree. And then we moved quickly after that to Dallas for him to work on his THM. And I never actually, like he said, I'm pretty agreeable. I was pretty agreeable, but I think we had never actually taken the time to evaluate where we really were as a couple and as individuals. And we don't come from, our parents are not married, so they were, but both of our parents have been divorced. So it's not like we watched couples work through these things and express these things. And so we were planting a church, and we weren't probably ready to be planting a church.
Since leaving the ministry and coming into Lifeway, leaving pastoral ministry, Lindley and I have...
Are we leaving the ministry?
Sorry, pastoral ministry. Lifeway is a ministry. Yes. It's different, though. We don't have the every Sunday get ready for church. And we realize now that treadmill, there was so much pressure every week just to produce Sunday that we had our own sets of stuff going on as a family, as a couple, that we kind of put on the shelf. Someday we're going to figure that out, but we got to get Sunday ready. Right. How did that start to show up in your marriage as you brought baggage to the church? We all do. How did it start to show up Sunday to Sunday in the church plant season?
For me, Duce was flourishing in a lot of ways because he is doing what he is called to do. And I think I found a lot of joy in watching him do that. Him being my pastor, like he has been my pastor, but for it to be official, I really took a lot of joy in that. And I actually got the opportunity to serve in ways I had never served before. I had never led a ministry. So we started a children's ministry. It blew up. I had staff. I had a budget. It was like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. I worked for women's ministry. We were on the board. It was so crazy to watch. But what was happening was in our home, so much was getting left undone. I was trying to homeschool kids. I had a business. I was discipling way too many women because there was only so many women who could do it. And our home was a constant revolving door to the point where it was like I would put a note on the door to say, please don't knock for just a couple hours because and he was traveling, he was here. It was just a lot. And what I began to see was I was almost, like you said, performing for Sunday. Get up, find an outfit to wear, make sure you didn't wear it in the last couple of weeks. Right. You know what I'm saying? Make sure you look the part, do all the things you got to do, and come home and crash. And it's crazy because in the moment, you feel like you have to do this. This is what I have to do. On the back end, I'm like, Missy, what in the world? Why didn't you just say it's got to stop? You know? And so I think I got caught up in the treadmill of I have to do this. I have to do this. We got the church has to keep going, not really recognizing that the church is supposed to be helping me as well.
So Missy mentions the treadmill of, I have to do this in the context of their church plant. And I think that's true of all church planners. I mean, you go in with this mission impossible, like failure is not an option kind of mindset, but that can lead to a just really emotionally unhealthy kind of deep dive.
You can't live on adrenaline forever. There's a reason why the Bible says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your understanding. It doesn't say trust in yourself with all your heart. And there is this fine line in church planning where you do have to have a certain level of self-confidence, but that self piece can grow pretty large as you begin to feel the walls closing in and timelines and the crowd's not growing fast enough. Those things can start to feel overwhelming to us in leadership.
Back on episode 12 with Rich Velotis, he said a quote that I thought was so interesting. He said, our refusal to stop reveals who we are putting our trust in. And when he said that, I don't even know if when we were recording, if I caught that as much as I did when I went back to listen to it and think, there are so many of us out there who are refusing to stop. And it's scary because that means that we just really are self-reliant and believe that we're doing all of this, all the success is based on our own doings.
One thing I learned recently in one of our own counseling sessions is the impaired or unhealthy side of fear is rage.
Mm-hmm.
We think about anger becoming rage. It's really not. Anger becomes depression. Fear becomes rage. I can tell you so many moments in church planning where I had rage because I was powerless. I could not get a contract in the school for the gathering. I could not figure out how to get this thing fixed or how to change this person's mind. And fear in its healthy form creates a sense of reliance and faith. But when you're in an unhealthy place, it becomes rage. And so you just walk around angry all the time that the church plant is not behaving. And that can begin to affect your marriage and your family. And for long, you're just walking through the house and you're emotionally vacant, even though you're physically present. And I think what they say about, I've got to do this, is a challenge that that mentality can hurt church planners. We all have a forecast of what we think is going to happen next week and the month after. And I remember at Storyline, we landed a piece of land in the prime part of the city, and we're gathering leaders, we're getting architects. This is the future of the church. And then the budget came in to actually build on that land. And I remember where I was in the vehicle in Arvada when I got that call, and my heart sank.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't afford it. But I remember the feeling of, oh my goodness, they're going to think I'm a horrible leader. I just gathered the whole church, had a pep rally around this land, and it's not even possible. What does this say about me as a leader? Are they going to unsubscribe from my leadership? I can't fix this land thing.
Yeah, but what was so sweet about that memory is that we've told you guys before that what we ended up doing was moving into a restored Walmart building. And the week that we got that notice was also the week that Walmart went out of business. And not that that's sweet. But I remember thinking, well, that is such cool timing, that because we had really been praying for that space for a long time and just thought, well, it's not going to happen. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, that Walmart closed its doors the same week that we got that. And so we just had to say, well, maybe this is, the direction that God's wanting us to go.
The moment that we found out the Walmart was available, I wish I could say that my heart suddenly swelled with faith. I was hurt and disappointed by God at that point, and I was seriously thinking, oh, I don't know, it never happened. Walmart won't sell to us. The city's not going to let this happen. And when you experience disappointment or you're crushed by circumstances in life, your faith gets squashed. And it's hard in church planning to overcome those moments of disappointment to say, oh, but God's still at work. He's going to open a door where there was no way, there's now a way. And I think in that moment, if I'm being transparent, I was in a bad place about whether this was ever going to work out at all. I was starting to think about plan B.
For me, where he was disappointed, I saw a lot of hope because I thought, well, at least there is a potential space versus being back in the high school still, setting up and tearing down, which was getting really wearisome. So, there are opposite times where I was really down and he was really up. And I do think that was the sweet timing of the Lord to kind of balance us out in those days.
Yeah, the old cliche is when God closes one door, he opens another. And in that case, it's exactly what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And church planting is all about dealing with closed doors, but looking for the next open door, which requires faith, which is what it's all about.
Duce, were you aware of what was going on with Missy, that she was withering and struggling with all the demands? Like, how dialed in were you at that moment?
Yeah. So, man, Glass House is right, because I feel the transparency in this moment. So right before we came, we were talking with the church. We were in Texas, so we were talking through this, and there was some of these things started spilling out. Some I don't wanna, but it was the only thing on the docket for me. Like like basically, I was like, I haven't changed. Like I didn't even know how to rethink. Like I felt called. I felt like that's what we agreed on. Though church planting originally wasn't in the works, nor pastoral ministry, it was it wasn't, you know what, I'm planning. It wasn't, it was a slow pivot. And I don't want to say anything that would sort of demean her, but at the time, I think I did not respect what she was saying. It felt feeling based, not biblically based. So I was almost like, I'm not hearing anything that should take priority over what I feel is there's a biblical case for, me being the kind of biblical stickler I am, right? So I'm like, I didn't trick you. You knew we were going back to Philly.
You
My
signed
4
up for
years.
this.
You signed up for this. 4 years is up. I'm not a Texan, right? I said I'm cut from a cloth, carved for context. You know it, like you too, like because you know when you meet somebody, you're like, is that what kind of gal is this? She can hang with the city. She can walk the concrete with me. We doing so in my mind. This is what we do. This is us. Like if you're having second thoughts, don't worry. God is with us. That's the way I was reasoning. I didn't realize how broken I was. I didn't realize how broken how weak our marriage foundation was because of things that I didn't know, and I didn't know what was going on in her. So then I started seeing it, but it started just looking like being withdrawn.
Wow.
But at that time, the pressures, I had rallied people. People had dropped off. I was trying to replace all the no-shows. Like I'm telling the guy, don't worry, we're going to Philly. I know a slew of great like soldiers, people who will help with ministry. I was embarrassed. Most of them. Remember when the Lord Jesus said, hey, they all said they're coming to the banquet. Now nobody's there. I just bought a field. Hey, I got married. Hey, I did real estate. And so to make a long story short, I felt like I had to hustle. I'm the guy. I'm the
work
rallier.
harder, knuckle down,
Right.
Work
Let's
harder.
Go. Because it's not going to happen. And people's lives are, and I did overlook. Again, hindsight is 20/20.
Right.
I didn't see it, and so when I started seeing what she was going through, then she had her mom and her sister. So it was almost like, but she's got who she needs anyway.
Yeah, but she really needed you.
Right. I'm in the win. You can come, but if you need to stay back and do your little home thing, amen. Because we need that too. That's how I looked at it.
Now let me stop you,
Yes.
Missy. Being married to him's got to be hard because he's very motivated. I mean, I'm pumped up right now.
Yes. And he is not putting on any performance right now. This is who he is.
He probably, every time you get down, he'd give you a motivational speech.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
God's got us. What are you talking about?
Right.
Let's go. We got to do this. We
Forgive
need
me,
you.
Lord.
You are in this. And I'm like, okay, yeah, all right. Okay, we're in this. We got this. And, there was never a time when I wasn't in resentment mode. I was beginning to be in I can't do this mode. And I think the part of me that didn't also want to feel like a failure and didn't want to look weak really wouldn't fully say. And then there's the part of you that feels like as a pastor's wife, you can't tell people. So I'm not sharing this with anyone. I'm just trying to not look weak and not fall apart and maintain all of this.
Since we're talking about church planting challenges today, we thought we would cut away for a quick look at some viewer mail. It's encouraging to us to see a community forming out there of people who are drawing strength from one another in the midst of ministry. And we got a letter recently from a church planter's wife. It was so encouraging.
She writes, I've been really enjoying your podcast. Church planting is uniquely wonderful and uniquely terrible all at the same time. Honestly, the past 2 years have been really, really difficult for us, but just hearing the podcast has reassured us that we aren't crazy, we aren't alone, and that just because something is hard doesn't mean it's not what God has for you. I especially appreciate your honesty about your marriage and the way ministry affects every part of your life and being. Know that many meals are being cooked with your words in the background.
So good to get mail. Let us keep hearing from you. We want to know what is really resonating with you and where we can focus the conversations in the future.
So we've done a lot of research this year on pastors and pastors' wives. There's a lot of folks out there listening that are in I can't do this mode.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you tell them? Like, how do you encourage those folks out there leading in a local church, the unsung heroes? Their people aren't showing up. They're showing up every Sunday. How are you encouraging them when you have those conversations?
The first thing is I recognize now, hindsight is 20/20, like he said, is that I was doing it in my strength. I was not genuinely laying it at the Lord's feet and saying, you have to make this happen because I can't. And so there was a whole lot of Missie trying to spin wheels and trying to create it. Like he said, we got it. This has to work. It has to work. What else is there? So that's the first thing. I think I realized that my season prior to it I hadn't prepared myself for this. So I hadn't devoted myself to the things I needed for the stamina for the next leg. And so I would say, if you're going to embark on something like this, you really need to be training in advance almost. You know what I'm saying? Preparing for that marathon. But then when you're in the midst of it, I feel like it was foolish to not ask for help. I feel like it was foolish to not say, we're falling apart. All of this can fall apart, but we need to be healthy. And so I think we have to get past the idea that pastors and pastors' wives are above pain, hurt, dysfunction, and be willing to say, we're a body. Yes, we lead here, but we need you to hold our arms up. And so I think now I would have said, I need help. I need help. I need people to come in. I need someone to breathe into me, someone to challenge him, someone to challenge me, someone to slow us down. And I think things would have been different. But we've learned some valuable lessons
from the school of hard knocks.
Yes.
So again, one of the things that they should do is they should take note of the landscape. There was no landscape for us. We are like at the beginning of our generation. Like we were like first generation church planters as a church planting movement and culture. The African American context, by and large, is not a church planting. There's not a church planting culture. I don't remember ever hearing that terminology. Right. There are new churches. You take over a church, you candidate, you split, There was no
playbook back then.
There was no playbook.
Right.
Then you add the urban. So, within the African American context, there's this through line of, again, marching for rights, marching for liberations of various kinds, seeking to gain ground. And one day something called hip hop came to the black community in particular, and the black context split over it. So you had the parents' generation actually splitting from what would become the hip hop generation. So that would be, of course, the black boomers and the black X's. And most people think, oh yeah, but that's the way it is with kids and their parents. It was something different. I always tell people, Bow Wow, if you've ever heard of the rapper Bow Wow, has his name in partly because he wanted to be like Snoop Dogg. And there's almost like a father-son gap there, right? So that would have been a case where both the father and the son would have shared a similar cultural affinity. My son and I share it. He'll come in my closet and, can I wear this hat? Absolutely. Whereas I would not go into my father's closet because hip-hop had done something. It radically shifted our community. Now, as far as religion goes, our church fathers didn't recognize us, but nor were they used to they weren't willing to coach us through it. They were like, shut it down. And so we actually found an embrace among whites who at least allow us to play. Go ahead, do it. Hip hop, oh man, you guys, that's pretty good, And there would be people who would come to us and say, you should consider planting a church. We never even heard that from our spiritual fathers. They would say, hey, you need to come up, I want you to, do my youth ministry. They would say, come up here, and be one of the associate ministers. And of course, everybody is waiting for their turn to get a church somewhere. These whites in particular were coming and saying, I've seen you. You should plant today, right? So that was paradigm shifting. So we didn't have anything to learn from
or
compare to on both a cultural level and an ecclesiological level. So I would say to people, really study. Don't just look at the horror stories and the war stories and say, oh, that happens sometimes, it'll never happen to me. I think we do need to learn from many of the high profile indicators that church planting is hard. Church planting can be, like my wife said, in the flesh. It can just be the sum total of, I got it, I'm pumped, let's go. And it's almost like the Lord is saying, like, apart from me, you can do nothing.
I was never in that.
I was never in it. Like, sure, the mechanics, you can go through the motion. It's like the guy who can get on the court and like, oh, Jordan, ha, ha, ha. But you can't be Jordan, right? But then there's somebody like a Kobe who can Jordan and actually look Jordan-esque. Sometimes I think they may get out there and say, I know how to do this. You get up, you put your hands in your pocket when you preach, you yell at them like, some of the guys I've seen, you tell a story, you got an intro, and you
get a couple
the
of
band,
tattoos
right,
on your
get your
forearm.
tattoos, you grow some facial hair, whatever it is, And so anyway, I say all of that. Well, not you, because
I don't have it.
Right, but
I'm an amazing rapper. You ought to see my hip hop.
That I can see.
Hear it.
I see it kind of jumping off you. I'm a little intimidated.
I know, I can tell. I want to go back to something you just said, though, because church planting does draw the kind of adrenaline junkie kind of Christian. Like Lindley and I, we got a little bit hooked on the adrenaline of church planting because it's such a demanding sport that you can find yourself so immersed in it, committed to being competitive. We're not going to lose. We're not going to lose.
And we're super competitive people.
We are.
So as it grew, we found ourselves saying, thanks be to God for what he's done. But really we were like, look what we're doing.
We're kicking butt over here.
Yeah, it became very unhealthy. I mean, as we left that situation and got here and had to really process our identity and, our belief that we had actually done that when really the Lord did it. And almost it was like he said, the Lord gives and takes away. It's almost like he took it away from us because we had become so proud of ourselves.
Well, and when she was talking about children's ministry, I know you had to resonate with that.
I was the director of kids ministry too.
Right.
Yeah,
and so, you want to talk about a high burnout role.
Yes.
Run kids ministry.
Oh my goodness.
The volunteer army required.
Yes.
But also rewarding. It's a really rewarding.
Life-changing.
And, the families that come in and the families who say they've had a great experience. I mean, you begin to applaud yourself a little bit like, oh, I did that, instead of.
And in depressed communities, the children are really how you gather the parents.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So we knew that the investment in the children in the community were going to bring the parents in, and it was crazy to watch it happen.
I think one of the conversations you have to have around this is just boundaries.
Yes.
There's only so much you can give of yourself before you're
Right.
going to be depleted.
Right.
If you could go back and talk to yourselves again, what things would you have done different to build a little recharge in there?
I would have learned to say no. Yeah, I felt like I am also competitive. So if you can do 2, I can do 3. I don't even know how I'm gonna do 3, but I can do it. And so I said yes to everything and anything anybody asked me to do. On top of knowing that I am the mom of 4 and I'm homeschooling, and I started a business, and it was like time consuming. I was a cake decorator, and so I'm creating these crazy things, and then discipling really probably 10, 15 women at a time, and it's just not realistic. And then also I'm saying I'm somebody's wife. I'm saying I'm these people's mom. I'm saying there was just no bandwidth for really. How are you just spending time with the Savior? How are you just resting? How are you just doing those things? And so I would just say no and be okay with that my identity, like you just said, is not wrapped up really in this moment.
How about you, Duce?
Well, yeah, obviously. So one of the things that sidelined me was the lack of boundaries in my interaction with people. And so the Lord had to reel me in because I crossed some lines, and mine were more, my results were more cataclysmic, bringing shame and pain to the marriage and the church and the whole nine. So obviously it's in the way. I relate it to people, but then in hindsight, when I think about the way wife, made it clear, like, you were just going to do it regardless, huh? Like, that's not an option. You don't do it regardless. Sometimes our timetables are off. Like I said, I didn't have another vision. I didn't have a vision. I didn't even know life could not include staying on course. I felt like seminary was a pause. Like seminary and Bible college had like, it is time. I mean, what are we talking about here? And
let's go get after
it. I would, of course, and I would not. I would get my house in order, and get my marriage in order, and get me in order. But again, I didn't know. So, but now that people have these testimonies, they can really look for. I heard a story about a guy who had discovered that he had cancer through someone just telling him, "Hey, I don't like that behind your ear. You should get that looked at." And he got it looked at, and he said, "That guy saved my life." He said, "I lost a piece of my ear, but I gained my life." Ever since I heard that story, unfortunately, I got this issue. Every little thing that might be wrong, I'm less prone to just dismiss the smaller things. Right, yes. I pay attention, like, hold on, you don't just overlook this. It could be something that, and I think it's that way. Now that they are hearing, may they become sensitive to the fact that there are warning signs that we are prone to overlook, just disregard, but it could be death to whatever is going on when you can handle it and, yes, lose a piece of ear, quote unquote, but save your life.
Good. That's really good.
Yeah, I tell my kids that smart people learn from their own mistakes, but wise people learn from other people's mistakes. And I think really being able to hear that someone is saying, we didn't do it right, but you can avoid this, is actually just a gift. We didn't have someone to say, you're messing up. And so, to really take the time to evaluate.
Tell us real quick the age of your children.
23, 22, 19, and 16.
All right. And one of them comes to you and says, Mom, Dad, we're going to plant a church. This is the grand finale of the interview. What would you tell them about, okay, if you're going to do it?
I'm an event planner, and the thing I say to everyone before we plan the event, expect things to fall apart. Prepare yourself that something is not going to work the way you had planned it, so that you have what it takes to fix that. So you have extra this and extra that, and that your attitude will be right, and that you won't be caught off guard, that you'll be prepared for those things to go wrong. And so in the same way, I would say, if you believe God is telling you to do this, we should affirm that because we've seen it, right? Because I'm your mom. But also, prepare yourself. Prepare yourself for things to not go the way you just said they were, that you thought they were going to go. And understand that that's a part of the process, that we can learn so much from our failures, our betrayals, our hurts.
That's really good.
I would say you should have already been doing what you're going to be doing. I think that ministry is a recognition that not only is it potential in you, but it's actual because you've been doing it. So elders have been eldering before they're made elders. Deacons have been serving. That's why people identify them as deacon worthy. So I'm like, if you're going to church plant, you should have already been making disciples. So again, I'm going to say that. And then I'm going to, again, know that you know.
Don't think you're going to go put some church planting costume on.
Absolutely.
You're either a church planter at heart or you're not.
Right.
And then if on a more conservative day, I'm going to remind them what Spurgeon used to do in trying to talk people out of the ministry so that the only people who go into the ministry in terms of the vocational pastoral ministry are those who can do nothing else. Because if you're just going to try your hand at it a little just to see if I'm good at it, that's less keeping or comforting than the person who says, me. I said, it's not like I want to do it. I wasn't like, I want church planting. Again, I didn't grow up with that as a category.
That's good.
But I felt the draw when I thought about people need what we had, but we didn't get it the way they're going to be able to get it, because we're going to integrate, because our minds was all over the place. We'll be an integrated feeder.
Lindley, Duce and Missie talk about how church planting, just emotionally and spiritually, it doesn't go as expected. Everybody has a vision of what they think is going to happen, and then they're surprised when it doesn't turn out anything like what they expect. So how do you think, let's talk about how couples can go ahead and prepare in advance for when things go a different way.
I mean, I think that can also be said for ministry couples in general. I mean, I think kind of the unwritten rule is that it's not going to go like you think it's going to go, whether good, better, or worse. And so I don't want to lead anyone out there to believe that this is only for church planting couples. And then if you're revitalizing a church, that it's going to go great and that you're not going to have any troubles coming up with a building committee or anything like that. I think, but what I just said is probably the best mentality, is to just expect the unexpected.
That's right.
I mean, I think that COVID has helped us with that so much, just learning to be flexible and learning to be fluid and just understanding that our expectations probably aren't going to happen. I mean, we just recently had a situation that we were going to a basketball game with our kids, and we were on the way to the game, and it got canceled here at Bridgestone Arena. And, and it was such a disappointment. And so I think that's kind of the story of life right now a little bit, is that we are kind of led to disappointment.
Without question, a big part of the discipleship Jesus put his own guys through was the preparation for pain and suffering. When he pulls Peter aside in John 21 and says, hey, when you were a kid, you dressed yourself, you went where you wanted to go. But when you were older, they're going to take you where you don't want to go. They're going to stretch out your hands. And when that happens, follow me. Jesus is preparing Peter for what he thinks Jesus knows is going to be a painful and challenging road. But Peter at that moment, I think in his career, thought this was going to be glamorous, exciting, maybe even celebrity-like for him, because he was the rock by which Jesus would build the church. And yet Jesus goes in advance and says, this is going to be suffering. Mm-hmm. And so I think church planning in its infant form is dreaming, it's forecasting, it's vision casting. It's all of the stuff future-oriented that you hope will happen, but then it never happens just like you're expecting it to happen. But I think maturity calls us to prepare for all kinds of ups and downs. It's a bumpy ride.
You just said suffering, and that made me think back to just a meeting that you were having with some people, and they were just asking your advice about what to look for in a future pastor for their church. And they spoke of, they wanted a guy who had suffered. And I do think that is that was really an eye-opening conversation for you. And when you were told it to me, because those are the people who can empathize with your congregation and sympathize. And so I think there is a level of suffering that goes into ministry that is actually helpful for you to be able to connect with your congregation.
Well, we go into church planting because of the sense of adventure. When Jesus sent his disciples out 2 by 2 and said, hey, don't carry a lot of extra money. I'm going to take care of you. You'll be provided for. They love that sense of adventure. But then you get out there and you realize this is scary. Mm-hmm. And church planters, the honeymoon wears off pretty quick of, we're in this new city. We're trying to plant this new church or whatever. And all of a sudden, it starts to feel like anxiety, fear, even, I think, a certain level of just chronic worry. And unless you're spiritually prepared for that moment, it can be a dark time. And so I do resonate with what Duce and Missie are saying, in that church planting is an intentional shot in the dark. You're walking to something that's entirely uncertain, but that's also the joy of it. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Glass House. We would love to include you in the conversation. If something stuck out to you in today's episode, let us hear from you, or a topic you'd love to see us tackle in the future, or just any question you want to fire at Lindley and me. Email us at president@lifeway.com.
The Glass House is hosted by Lifeway, executive produced by Joy Almond, produced and edited by Angie Elkins Media, original music by Robert Elkins, sound engineering by Dale Sandberg, and artwork by Cameron Spooner.